You can fake a lot in this world. Strength, confidence, kindness, even ambition and discipline, but only for a short time. The mask might hold, but eventually, the truth slips through. These signals aren't loud or obvious. They're subtle. Quiet cracks in a carefully constructed facade, and most people miss them. But Machiavelli didn't. He was a master observer of human nature, and he knew the stakes were too high to guess wrong. In his time, surrounded by liars, opportunists, and cowards, he learned how to spot weakness before it became a problem, before it cost lives, power, or reputation. Strength doesn't scream. It stands steady and silent. Weakness doesn't shout. It slips through cracks. Today, we begin a deep dive into Machiavelli's mind, his method for detecting weakness in others, and why this knowledge is vital if you want to survive and thrive in any competitive environment. Let's start by understanding how weak men betray themselves. Not by what they say, but through their actions and behaviors. Behaviors so subtle most people overlook them entirely. But Machiavelli treated this knowledge like a dagger. Precise, deadly, and absolutely necessary. Strong men stay calm and silent. Weak men expose themselves through patterns they don't even realize. There are 3 key behaviors Machiavelli identified that instantly reveal a man's weakness. Knowing them gives you an edge, a weapon few others have. Behavior. 1. Overjustification. The need to explain instead of decide. Imagine a man who cannot simply make a decision and act on it. Instead, he feels compelled to explain himself, defend every choice, and justify his actions endlessly. This is the first unmistakable sign of weakness. Machiavelli watched this in the courts of princes and ministers. The truly powerful leader spoke little. His decisions were commands, not requests. The weak man, on the other hand, needed others to agree with his logic to feel valid. This endless explanation is not honesty. It is insecurity. Overjustification is a smokescreen for fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, and ultimately, fear of power itself. Power requires silence. Power demands conviction. Real power means making moves without feeling the need to explain yourself. So the next time someone keeps repeating their point, desperately trying to sound reasonable, likable, or morally correct, listen carefully. You're not hearing strength. You're witnessing a slow collapse from within. At this point, most people stop and try to defend themselves, but Machiavelli understood that the strong don't need to explain. They decide. Let me ask you, how often do you find yourself explaining your choices to avoid conflict or gain approval? That's your first crack. Your chance to catch your own weakness before someone else does. Because a man who begs for validation forfeits authority. Behavior. 2 and 3 are coming next. But for now, remember this. Silence is a weapon. If you wield it well, you don't need to shout. People will listen. We just uncovered the first behavior that exposes a weak man. The compulsive need to overjustify and explain himself. Now, we move to the second behavior, which is far more dangerous because it hides behind a friendly smile. This is weaponized niceness, a weakness disguised as virtue. At first glance, this man looks kind, helpful, and agreeable. He's the guy who says yes too much, agrees to everything, compliments endlessly, and apologizes even when he's not wrong. It's easy to mistake this for real kindness, but Machiavelli knew better. Real kindness is a sign of strength. It's selective, deliberate, and never comes at the expense of self-respect. The strong man chooses when and to whom he is kind. The weak man, however, tries to be agreeable all the time because he fears conflict more than anything else. This compulsive niceness is a strategy. a desperate attempt to avoid tension, rejection, or disapproval. And when niceness fails, the mask slips. You've seen it happen. The fake friendly guy suddenly turns bitter, sarcastic, or passive-aggressive when his people-pleasing doesn't get the validation he craves. Machiavelli observed this pattern in the courts and public figures of his day, the men who lacked backbone but tried to hide it behind smiles. He wrote, "A prince must know how to do wrong and not use it unless compelled." That's real restraint. Power controlled by choice. Weaponized niceness? That's fear dressed as virtue. The man who can't say no, who apologizes when he shouldn't, who avoids conflict at all costs. He's a weak man. Someone who doesn't know how to stand tall on his own 2 feet. He stays small, hoping no one notices or steps on him. And when pressure mounts, when loyalty is tested, his facade cracks wide open. If you see this behavior in someone, compulsive friendliness that crumbles under pressure, you've found a man who cannot be trusted with power. Real power demands the ability to set boundaries, face tension head-on, and say no without apology. A man like this will fold the moment the stakes rise. Here's a critical point. Weaponized niceness isn't just a personal flaw. It's a danger to everyone around him. Because when a man hides weakness behind false kindness, he invites chaos, disloyalty, and betrayal into his circle. The weak man's loyalty isn't built on respect. It's built on fear. Fear of losing approval, fear of being rejected. And fear is not the foundation of power. Think about the people in your life who always try to please, avoid conflict, and apologize unnecessarily. What happens when you push them? When the pressure is real? Do they stand firm? Or do they crack and disappear? If the answer is the latter, you're dealing with weaponized niceness, weakness masquerading as strength. In the next part, we'll explore the third and most exposed behavior that gives away weakness instantly, the desperate need for attention and recognition. Until then, observe your surroundings. Notice who smiles to avoid tension, but falters when challenged. Recognize that real strength is not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to bow. So far, we've uncovered 2 behaviors that expose weakness: overjustification and weaponized niceness. Now let's dive into the third behavior, which is perhaps the most obvious, yet equally dangerous, sign of weakness. I'm talking about the display addict. You've seen him before. The man who can't sit still without being noticed. The one who constantly posts online, talks loudly in meetings, exaggerates every win, and turns every moment into a performance. He's the center of attention, or at least desperately trying to be. But Machiavelli understood this man perfectly and saw his weakness underneath all the noise. The display addict fears being forgotten more than anything else. This isn't weakness born from lack of opportunity or poverty. This is a deep, internal rot of identity. The man addicted to display has no internal foundation. His value depends entirely on external validation. If the applause stops, he panics. If the spotlight fades, he collapses. This is not confidence. It's desperation. Machiavelli knew these men were liabilities. They would lie, embellish, betray, and turn on allies just to keep the attention flowing. Their need to be seen was so strong that they would sacrifice anything for it. But here's the kicker. The best way to destroy a display addict is to ignore him. Cut off the spotlight. Take away the applause. Watch how quickly he breaks. Because while strong men train quietly in silence, growing their power unseen and striking only when the time is right, the display addict crumbles without constant recognition. This frantic need to be seen makes him predictable, easy to manipulate, easy to control, and impossible to trust. Machiavelli feared weakness more than wickedness, because at least the wicked man knows what he wants. The weak man wants everything but will trade anything to get it. The display addict's craving for attention is a fatal flaw, one that makes him a puppet in the hands of those who understand his needs. If you want to be strong, avoid this trap. Build your power in silence. Grow in shadows. Strike without warning. True strength is invisible until it moves. In the next part, we'll explore how Machiavelli didn't just identify these weaknesses. He used them as weapons to build power and control. Until then, watch those around you. See who craves the spotlight desperately, and you'll know who cannot be trusted. Welcome back. Now that you've learned to spot the 3 key behaviors that expose weak men, overjustification, weaponized niceness, and display addiction, it's time to go deeper. Because Machiavelli didn't just identify weakness, he weaponized it. In the ruthless game of power, spotting weakness is only the first step. The real mastery lies in using it to your advantage. Machiavelli knew that weak men don't break when tested, they melt. And in politics, war, business, or trust, you can't afford to depend on men who melt under pressure. So how did he use this knowledge? He turned these behaviors into tools, predictors, and leverage points. Let's break down how Machiavelli played these men like a master puppeteer. First, the compulsive justifier, the man who needs to explain everything. Instead of challenging him, Machiavelli listened. He nodded, said, "That makes perfect sense." Suddenly, the man attached himself to Machiavelli, craving more of that rare validation. This wasn't respect or loyalty, it was leverage. Next, the people pleaser, the man who tried to stay nice and agreeable at all costs. Machiavelli gave him a role, made him feel chosen, made him feel safe, part of something powerful. That man would never betray Machiavelli, not out of loyalty, but because betrayal would mean losing the fragile identity that Machiavelli helped hold together. Finally, the display addict, the man who needed constant attention. Machiavelli offered him the stage. Let him speak, take credit for ideas, wear the costume of influence. But behind the scenes, Machiavelli wrote the script, because if you give a weak man the illusion of power, he will never question who really holds it. This is psychological engineering at its finest, not with brute force or loud domination, but with subtle control. Machiavelli created empires by identifying the weak, then letting their desperation build his palace. If they ever turned on him, he didn't fight. He withdrew attention. Silence became the weapon that crushed them. Nothing destroys a weak man faster than being ignored by the person whose approval shaped him. This is the essence of the Machiavellian art. You don't expose weakness by confrontation. You expose it by never needing to. While the weak man chases applause, you stay still and silent, watching. You acquire power while they perform. In the next part, we'll explore the final rules Machiavelli lived by, how to maintain the gap between strength and weakness, and how to avoid being betrayed by those you control. So far, we've learned how Machiavelli identified weakness in men and used it as a tool for his rise. But knowing the weaknesses and exploiting them isn't enough. You must also maintain absolute control. Machiavelli's coldest rule is this: never let a weak man believe he's your equal. Why? Because the moment he does, he forgets who built him. He begins to overreach, fantasize about rebellion, and challenge your authority. You must keep the gap wide. Reward just enough to keep him moving, but never enough for him to believe he no longer needs you. If he tries to challenge you, don't retaliate, replace him, because there is no shortage of weak men desperate for validation. But there is only one of you. This is where true power lives. in direction by instinct, not brute force, in puppeteering insecurities until they call it loyalty. You don't need a title or crown. You don't even need to speak loudly to control weak men. All you need is understanding and silence. Machiavelli knew the best manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like friendship, mentorship, presence. Weak men are always watching, not for truth, but for signals. They move toward approval like moths to a flame. Once you master this, you can shape their entire behavior without raising your voice. You become the calm in their storm. Here's how to stay untouchable. First, speak less than they expect. The weaker the man, the more he needs verbal affirmation. So offer silence, strategic silence. Let them overexpose themselves. Let them talk themselves into guilt, loyalty, admiration. When you speak, make it count. That single compliment, nod, or rare advice becomes gold. They begin working for something inside them, something you created. Second, be the calm in their chaos. Weak men live in emotional reactivity. They panic when plans shift, overcorrect when criticized, spiral when ignored. You do the opposite. Stay composed. Move with quiet intention. This contrast makes you seem powerful without you ever claiming it. Third, reward unpredictably. Don't praise or support consistently. Become mysterious. Some days you acknowledge them. Some days you vanish. Uncertainty creates addiction. They never know when your approval will come, so they keep performing, guessing, and talking about you. You become not just a leader, but an obsession. When they start needing your presence, your approval, your recognition, they fear your disapproval. You don't punish them. Your absence is punishment. Your silence is correction. They can't escape it. Now they belong to you. Not by fear or threats, but by a deeper, subtler bond, dependency. This is the art of identifying weak men and turning them into tools of your rise. In the final part, we'll close with how to master this system not only in others, but within yourself. The daily war of self-mastery that keeps you sharp, unbreakable, and truly powerful. Now that you understand how to spot weakness in others and use it to your advantage, the most important lesson remains. You must hunt weakness within yourself every single day. Machiavelli knew that weakness doesn't come crashing in loudly. It sneaks in silently, through small cracks in your behavior and mindset. It's in the over-explaining when silence would serve better. It's in the need to be liked before leading. It's in the craving for applause instead of calm confidence. It's in apologies given not for being wrong, but for fear. This is the daily war. Self-mastery. Machiavelli built a system to detect weakness in himself before anyone else could. First, he watched how he explained himself. Was he deciding with conviction or begging for acceptance? When it was the latter, he stopped immediately, because a man who begs for validation forfeits authority, even in his own eyes. Second, he tested how often he said yes. A weak yes is dangerous, agreeing to avoid conflict, to gain favor, or out of fear. Machiavelli paused before every yes, asking, would I say yes if I didn't fear losing approval? If the answer was no, he declined. No apologies, no excuses. Because once your word loses weight, you lose power, even over yourself. Third, he measured how silence felt. Weak men hate silence. They rush to fill it with jokes, compliments, or explanations. Machiavelli embraced silence as a weapon. He trained himself to be comfortable in quiet rooms, to lean into tension, because mastered silence becomes presence, and presence becomes a silent intimidation, a force felt without being claimed. Fourth, he resisted unnecessary exposure. The weak man always wants to be seen, The strong man chooses when. Machiavelli practiced invisibility, moving only when every piece was perfectly in position. When he finally acted, it wasn't progress. It was arrival. He built anticipation not with announcements, but with absence. Most men try to look powerful, but they never ask themselves, do I chase praise? Do I fear rejection? Do I speak to be heard or to be agreed with? Do I need people to like me before I lead? Do I explain when silence would be stronger? These questions reveal not just weakness, but your limits. You have two choices. Feed those cracks and stay weak, or kill them and become unshakable. Because in the march of the world, you don't get punished for being evil. You get punished for being predictable, emotional, and weak. You strip it out, bit by bit, word by word, decision by decision, until one day you speak and the room freezes. You move and people adjust. You lead and no one questions how you got there, because they don't see a man trying to look strong. They see a man forged in silence. Remember, respect isn't begged for. It's engineered. The highest respect comes from mastering what weak men fear most: discomfort, judgment, solitude. A Machiavellian man doesn't run from tension. He sharpens under it. He kills the need for applause. He silences the voice craving attention. He makes peace with his own solitude. That is power. Rare power. And rare things are valuable. So when you enter a room and don't need to prove anything, when your posture holds while others flinch, when your silence weighs heavier than their best words, you change the dynamic. You don't chase respect. You become respect. That is Machiavellian power. That is mastery. That is the path to becoming untouchable. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the subtle art of identifying weakness and forging true strength. If you value strategy over sentiment, truth over comfort, make sure to subscribe for more unflinching analysis of power and human nature. Remember to like and share this knowledge with those who understand. The most dangerous opponent is the one you never saw coming. Until next time, build in silence, strike without warning, rule with presence.